Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to a special edition of the Finding Financial Fitness Show. So, although you might not be able to see it if you're listening, of course, but I encourage you to tune into YouTube. But we're finally live together, Pei and I, in the same room. Pei, how you doing?
How are you? This is so crazy
and weird. It's a little odd. We're so used to looking at our laptops or at our screens when we're talking to each other, but seeing you face to face, it is kind of weird. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah, I feel like there should be a third camera that actually films us filming.
Yeah.
You know, like the filming Inception.
Like have a camera right there.
Right.
I mean, I think eventually that would actually be pretty cool.
Right.
Like where we can just do like a big panel of us talking. But for the time being, while we're still not fully advanced into that kind of podcast yet, we'll do this. But no, it's great. I've been looking forward to it. We're finally 20 episodes in, and we're finally doing this in person.
Well, technically, it's my fault.
No,
we had some
technology.
technical difficulties, and it takes time to get the boomer like up to. Well, actually, I'm not even boomer. I'm X-Gen.
Are you really?
I'm actually X-Gen. Yeah.
Generation X. Yeah, X-Gen. Okay.
Well, yeah. So. But I act like I'm a boomer, I guess.
That's okay. So I'm glad we're here. I'm glad we're in person, being able to talk. So we'll caveat people with, if they see our eyes looking down or looking to the side, it's because we are still getting adjusted to doing this.
Yeah, yeah.
Although it's great, we love it. So today we'll talk about fitness, the fitness piece of the Finding Financial Fitness portion of it all. And we've mentioned it, previously on different episodes about dieting and about weight loss and weight maintenance and all these things. But you and I were talking offline before about just different things that you've tried and that I've shared as well. And so talk to me about some of the diets that you yourself have either heard of. Maybe you have a friend who's been successful with the diet, or maybe you yourself have tried the diet. Tell me some of those that you've heard of, that you've done, and then I'll kind of dissect them a little bit, maybe debunk some of the myths, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. And I think, previous episodes I may have shared, I had some health challenges back in 2019. And prior to that, actually, I think I was fairly typical growing up where, I did a lot of yo-yo dieting, like I am by nature tall, right? I'm a tall person. So I'm big boned. I like to say. I've never fit into that norm of, the petite girl type body, but so my weight has ebbed and flowed. But at my heaviest, I didn't feel good, right? And I was a teacher at the time, and a lot of junk food and a lot of binge eating because just you're stressed and you're tired and you're not taking good care of yourself. I think ballooned up to like unbelievable amount of weight, and I went super like cold turkey and went and did intermittent fasting, like 1 meal a day, and then also combined it with keto. And that actually worked for me. And I lost 65 pounds in a fairly quick fashion. And I'm still on medication, to be honest, on to manage my blood pressure and all that kind of stuff. But that kept me away from higher dosage, right? So I got to a point where I do want to do better, but it's hard to motivate, and I feel like I plateaued, right? And the struggle is I kind of know what to do, but it's hard to do what I did. And especially, I have to account, it's not just me living in this world by myself, right? I have a family, I have friends, and I have people that, like to hang out and eat, right? So eating only 1 meal a day, and then like eating keto, very strict, cutting out all sugars, cutting out all breads, all carbs. That was tough.
Well, especially when you're combining it with fasting, where not only are you depriving yourself of foods that you might enjoy, but when you are able to eat, you're only able to eat once. And you're like, I need to just get everything in.
Yeah.
Because you're hungry.
I call that my feeding schedule.
That's fair.
Like an animal in the zoo, right?
Well, it's funny because that's actually, when you look into intermittent fasting and studies, and just when you have a coach who does fasting, they will call it your feeding schedule. They'll say, okay, the most common thing people say is follow the feeding schedule of 16-8, which is basically you don't eat for 16 hours and then you have an 8-hour window. Right. It's kind of the most popular. I mean, what you did was more.
But I went even more extreme.
Right,
I only, even in that 8-hour window that I can eat, I only ate 1 meal.
Right.
I ate till I was really full. But I did make sure that I was eating, like protein and,
Yeah, yeah.
and veggies and stuff. Like my salad was like so big,
Yeah.
I'm like, I'm still eating.
I'm
This
not
never
hungry.
ends. I'm
Well,
not hungry, but I have to eat because I'm like, in 1 hour, I'm going to be,
right. You're going to be regretting not having
yeah,
more.
exactly.
And what's funny is I find it just very interesting that you're not alone with that. I think obviously you've done it to the extreme. Most people will either do a keto diet, and let's define what a ketogenic diet is. So keto is typically, so keto is short for ketogenic. And what that means is just there's a primary source of fuel for your body, and that's glucose, carbohydrates. So typically when we eat, when we get energy to our brain, it's in the form of glucose. So our body will eat our food, break it down, and then it'll store glucose in the liver. It'll pass it through the bloodstream to all of our muscles, our liver, our brain, because our brain needs to rely on glucose to function. If we deprive ourselves of glucose, we can actually die. But what there's another kind of alternative method of, it's more in starvation mode, that if we're in, just think about our ancestors when we lived just in a forest and we didn't know when our next meal was going to come. Glucose, if there wasn't enough glucose, our body came up with a new adaptive mechanism called ketones. And that meant that our body could break down fat and primarily protein into these ketone bodies, which could also cross the blood-brain barrier and keep us alive in the brain, keep our brain functioning. So it was more of a survival mechanism. And of course, nowadays you have people who will turn that into saying, well, it's actually better to rely on ketones than it is for glucose. That on its own, that statement is not true. That's not to say that a ketogenic diet doesn't work. And a ketogenic diet can work for multiple reasons, but just like many diets can work, the primary reason why those diets work is because of calorie restriction. It has nothing to do with, I'm cutting out refined sugars, I'm cutting out fat, I'm cutting out protein, I'm cutting out dairy, name your food group. It has to do primarily with caloric restriction. So ketogenic diet, and it's the same thing with fasting. So you kind of, as I mentioned, went to like two different extremes. So with ketogenic diet, typically the calorie intake is lower, typically, which is what causes the weight loss. If calories out is not greater than calories in, you will not lose weight. So regardless if you're on a ketogenic diet or not. So on a ketogenic diet, keto for short, you're restricting carbohydrates and you're primarily getting your source of, if you're doing it correctly, your carbohydrates should be less than 20, 25, 30 grams of carbs per day. And you mentioned vegetables and like a salad, especially eating like one meal, you could very easily just on a salad alone get well above that 30, 40 grams of carbohydrates. When you factor in like dark leafy greens, broccoli, if you're having carrots, like these types of vegetables also have starches, they're carbohydrates. So you can well go over that. But typically to get into ketosis, if you want to do it correctly, you should be monitoring your ketone bodies. And you do that through like a prick analysis. So you literally have a device.
Like a sugar test.
It's similar to a blood sugar test, correct. And you just prick yourself, take the blood out, you put it on this little inlet thing, and it measures your ketone levels. In order to follow a keto diet correctly, you need to be in ketosis, and you have to monitor that by doing this. The other diet you mentioned, fasting, it's very popular nowadays. And the main reason why it's popular is because people have lost weight on it. But let's just think about it on a simple basis, right? You mentioned you had one meal a day. And what were you saying that the most difficult part of it was? You didn't want to keep eating, right? You got to a point where you're like, I can't eat anymore, right? Because your stomach is essentially like has like rubber band material. It's elastic, but it can only stretch so far. It's not like you can bring all and store all of your food for the whole day in there and then just gradually break it piece by piece until you eventually have your calories. It can only have so much. It can only get filled up to a certain level.
Yeah.
So typically, if your normal eating schedule is from 7 a.m. till 7 p.m., and within that you have 3 meals, let's just say. Well, if you start fasting and you do a typical 16-8 split, which is 16 hours of not eating and 8 hours of eating, you're cutting out breakfast. So you're right away cutting out one meal. If you don't do anything else to your other 2 meals and continue to eat the same, what happens? You're eating less calories. So what happens as a result of eating less calories, assuming the other side of the equation, which is calories out, stays the same. Physical activity doesn't change. By just changing the left side of that equation and eating less, you're going to lose weight. Like that is the science behind why intermittent fasting and any diet works.
So is there a way on that diet to, or maybe there's already studies out there that's done it, where if you're working with a dietitian and whatnot, and you're getting that calorie in, you're saying that you're not going to lose weight?
If your calories in are less than what you're burning,
then you will.
Then you won't. Your calories out has to be greater than your calories in. So just for a simple kind of terminology is it's CAICO, calories in calories out.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are taking in more calories than you're burning, you're going to gain weight.
Yeah.
If they're the same, you're going to maintain weight. And if your calories out is greater, you're going to lose weight. No matter what you do, right? If you can work with a dietitian, and you can do intermittent fasting for a diet. It's definitely possible, but don't equate the mechanism as to why it works. People think there's this magic behind, oh, I went 16 hours without eating, and in the 12th hour, X hormone was released and it told my body, lose all this body fat. I laugh about it, but it's true. That's genuinely what people think. It's all in the calorie equation, and that's all diets. Carnivore, when people go on a carnivore diet, which is primarily just eating meat, you've eliminated 95% of all food groups, and you're just eating meat. Genuinely think, how much steak can you eat in a day? How much meat, how much bacon, how much eggs kind of falls into that category? How much can you eat throughout the day? It's very, very challenging to get 1,800, 2,000 calories in through a carnivore diet.
Yeah.
So that's why you can lose weight and will lose weight if your calories in is less.
You probably just don't eat because you got sick and tired of eating
Right.
the same thing.
Right.
You'd be like, another steak? Come on.
Right. And again, it's not to say that the diets don't work. And I am of the firm belief that if you can follow a diet that works for you, by all means do it. But first of all, don't fool yourself, and don't fool others and tell them you need to do this keto diet because I lost 70 pounds. And then they equate that to, oh, well, my friend lost 70 pounds doing keto. But the reason why you lost the weight wasn't because of the foods you were eating. It was because of the fact you were eating less. That's why you lost weight.
Right. So on the another angle of that same equation, then, because it's almost like it's just math, right?
Literally is.
It's just math.
Yeah.
So that means you technically, can you eat the same thing but just increase your activity? And
yes,
you know what I mean?
Great question. That's a really good question that most people actually don't ask. The answer to that question is absolutely. So if you are at a base now, I'm talking very, very high level. There will come a point where no matter how much or how little you eat, your body does not allow you to lose more weight. Right. So we'll get to that. And I think that's what happened with you and many other people who yo-yo diet, and you lose a lot of weight and then try to keep using that same mechanism and they don't work.
Yeah.
But for the time being, let's just say somebody is going on their first diet, or they haven't gone on a diet in a while, and they eat the same and they're eating 2,000 calories a day. But let's say they've been maintaining their weight for the last 6 months. And then they go and they start working out. They go on a walk. They stay going 3 walks a week, and then they start weightlifting 3 times a week, an hour each time. That calorie expenditure from walking would burn probably about 100, 200 calories an hour. From weightlifting, same, probably 200, 300 calories an hour. So let's say they're burning an additional 900, let's say 1,000 calories to keep it simple, additional 1,000 calories per week. And they're eating 2,000 calories a day. So 2,000 calories times 7 is 14,000. But now they're burning an additional 1,000 calories. So keep in mind that 3,500 calories equals 1 pound. And again, I'm very, very simplifying it. Right. But if you eat 3,500 calories less over a prolonged period of 3 weeks, you're eventually going to lose a pound. And if you want to increase the rapidness of that, maybe you double your activity and you drop your calories by 500. Well, then that's a maybe 1 to 2 pound weight loss per week. And you can monitor this. How? By weighing yourself. That's the only way you're going to monitor it. Keep in mind, though, and this is very important caveat. When you start weight training, especially as a beginner, your weight changes will not be pronounced on the scale because muscle weighs more than fat.
Right.
And because of that, you might be only losing 2 pounds. But as I mentioned in an earlier episode, if your clothes fit better, if you look physically better, if your arms are more defined, you're less big boned, as a result, then whatever you're doing is working. So you can change both sides of the equation for sure. And typically as a dietitian, when we start diet plans, I don't like calling them diet plans, I like to call them lifestyle plans, although it's a cliche. When we start those, we typically try to work on both equations, because I'm sure you've probably seen or heard of these studies in the past. There's people out there who have done studies where they will take somebody on a 2,000 calorie diet only eating McDonald's.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But they'll go work out. I mean, they'll run marathons. They'll burn a hell of a lot of calories, and they'll lose weight.
Yeah.
They will lose weight, because at the end of the day, it all comes down to the macro equation: calories in, calories out.
I think, wasn't it Michael Phelps not that Olympics is happening anyways. He was saying that,
Yeah.
he wasn't eating very healthy as an athlete. He was eating like McDonald's and stuff.
Well,
but he was burning so much calorie.
You're right, because he was burning so many calories. There comes a point, but I want to again caveat this with the fact that 99% of people listening to this does not apply to you. As in, like, don't go thinking, well, I run a mile every Sunday. I need my McDonald's. Like, don't lie to yourself. But
Yeah.
I will answer that question. Yes, that's very true. Now, there is a myth behind it. It was said that Phelps was eating 8 to 10,000 calories a day. That's not true, because
Okay.
he wasn't eating that much, but he was eating upwards of 5,000-6,000. Still, an enormous amount. Go try and eat 5,000 calories a day. It is extremely hard. Although some people will say, no, it's not.
Well, it's a tub of ice cream.
Fair enough, but it is very difficult to eat. But for him, when you're an athlete and you know that you need to eat nutritious foods, eating 5,000 calories of nutritious foods is
Difficult.
damn near impossible. I
Yeah.
promise you that. As somebody who's been in the fitness industry for a while, and remember, I just told you calories in, calories out to lose weight. The inverse is true. Calories in has to be greater than calories out to gain weight.
Right.
Specifically to gain muscle. And as somebody who's actively tried to gain muscle over many, many years, it's very hard to eat a bunch of brown rice and white rice and oatmeal and these starchy carbohydrates and protein and healthy fats and get to a point where you're like, I can't eat anymore. It's very difficult to do that. So with him, it's a lot easier to get in these calorie dense foods, such as a McDonald's, such as bagged chips, such as ice cream, where they're calorie dense. The foods that we tell people to avoid, those athletes would be consuming them because they're easy caloric foods. But again, for the sake of this discussion,
Right.
for the sake of most people, that's literally in case of emergency, break glass. If you're like an elite athlete who trains like he was in the pool 6 to 8 hours a day, like
Yeah,
burning
exactly.
a lot of calories.
Right. And also, I want to touch on that, right? It just seems like the quality of the calories is also important, right? There's also one other diet that I heard of that I never tried, was called a whole food diet, where I think you're able to lose weight just because you go to Whole Foods and it's so expensive, you end up not buying anything.
I've never heard that before. Whole Foods, if you're listening, please do not sue us.
We're obviously not sponsored by Whole Foods.
Yeah, this show is
Never
brought to
will
you
be.
by McDonald's.
It never will be at the end of this. But my whole point is we want to start these things, but sometimes, one of the factors is it's expensive. I don't shop at Whole Foods because when you're like, oh, I want to buy everything organic and stuff. That's a lofty ideal. And then you go there and you see how much things cost. You're like, oh no, you know what? I'm fine with the store brand.
Right.
But is there a difference? Like you were just talking about, obviously we're not talking about the extremes of McDonald's. On McDonald's, that food, obviously, even though it looks like real food, it's probably not real. But like even on every average, daily basis, is there a difference? The calories from different sources.
100%. Yeah, no, without a doubt. And this comes into, again, I talked about the bigger equation. When we're talking about strictly weight loss, we're looking at calories in, calories out. But weight loss is literally one piece of the puzzle. There's so many other factors. There's health risk factors, like you mentioned, different comorbidities, right? You might be more prone based on your genetic profile. So if you're more prone to heart disease, you really want to be careful with the saturated fat you're eating. You really want to be careful with the inflammatory foods. And you want to actually focus on anti-inflammatory foods. So in this regard, I'm talking strictly about one little piece, which is cardiac. You want to make sure that the foods you're getting, you're avoiding those inflammatory foods and focusing more on things that are anti-inflammatory, such as fish oil, avocados, nuts, those healthy fats. So in that regard, you're building a healthy diet to help you lose weight, but also to address your cardiac issues. That's one diet. There's other kind of comorbidities you might have, such as diabetes. It's another one. So if you're diabetic or pre-diabetic, again, you could still lose weight by having less calories than you're taking in, but you don't want to spike your blood sugars if you're already pre-diabetic as a result of gaining a lot of weight. So while the calories in, calories out equation is the most important for weight loss, you can't ignore everything else. And when it comes to the quality of foods, the main thing that we're looking at is the nutrients, the micronutrients. So the macronutrients are your carbs, your protein, and your fat. And alcohol is technically a macronutrient. When you look at those, you're looking at just what the calories equal. But then there's a layer below that, which is the micronutrients, your vitamin A, your vitamin D, your vitamin C, everything that makes your organs and your brain function at an optimal level. So while you could lose weight eating just 2,000 calories from McDonald's, your lipid profiles and your blood markers will be a lot worse, and you'd be at higher risk of developing other diseases. And I go back to really the whole purpose of not this podcast, but our whole podcast in general. Why are we talking about weight loss? We're talking about in the context of having a healthier life. What is losing 50 pounds if after you lose 50 pounds, you develop diabetes, or you get renal failure, or you have cirrhosis because you drink alcohol? Like, what's the point of it all? And so we're looking at it from that bigger lens. So the answer to that question is absolutely. It does matter. The quality of the food definitely matters, which is why I firmly believe, and I mentioned this in a prior episode, it's so important to not eliminate food groups, right? Everyone wants to pick on a certain food group. And if you open the news articles on your phone or on your tablet, or you watch the TV, it's always, this food is bad. This food group is avoid dairy, avoid saturated fat, avoid gluten, avoid fiber. Like, everything has been demonized.
Right.
So you never want to avoid a food group, aside from maybe trans fats, which you can't really find anymore. But you never really want to avoid food groups. You want to incorporate all these nutrients into your diet or into your new nutrition plan to help you with your main goal of losing weight. But as a result of eating those more of those nutrients, you're going to increase your overall well-being. And what you'll realize is people associate when I ask people, why do you want to lose weight? The common answer is, I want to feel better. I want to look better. All right. Two things. Looking better is subjective.
Yeah.
Fully. Feeling better is subjective, but it also is objective. People will attribute them feeling better to the fact that they've lost the weight. And to an extent, that's true because you're more mobile, you're more agile. But there's the quote unquote feeling better has a lot to do with the fact that your nutrients are back to where they should have been. So one of the first things I always recommend people to do when they go on a diet is go get your labs done. Because if you're deficient in a vitamin, you need to supplement with that vitamin. And if you're iron deficient, if you have iron deficiency anemia and you start taking iron, your energy levels are going to go like that, despite of what you do with your calories. So to answer your question, nutrients, absolutely, quality of calories do matter. And I will mention, we can discuss in a little bit, the real food and the whole foods debate about, there's a lot of mixed reviews about, is eating healthier really more expensive? But I'll touch in on that a little bit. But does that clear it up in terms of the quality of calories and the nutrients?
Yeah, because I've always, growing up, I've never been a skinny kid, but I've always envied the others who can eat whatever they want and they just never gain weight. But then I realized that I think it's one of those things that it will catch up to them later, right? Of course, genetic has a lot to do with, all this. I joke, I have the body type where I gain weight when I drink water.
Yeah. You're not alone.
And it just, I see sometimes, kids, especially they eat, and obviously they're young, right? The metabolism is great, fantastic at that age. So you could eat chocolate croissant all day and not have any issues. But I feel like you're kind of storing up your problem, right? At an early age. So that's one thing that I'm trying to be very mindful with my daughter. Like, hey, like right now you can eat whatever you want and you'll burn it off, right? You go into the gym and you lift weights for a day and you're like, next day you're like, oh yeah, see, I don't feel so bloated anymore. But I'm like, you're kind of layering a lot of the things that's going to catch up to you later.
Well, I think you're referencing behaviors.
Yeah.
And I think that is, I've known people like that who their whole life, and even into their 20s and sometimes even their 30s, there's this concept of skinny fat, right? These people who they'll eat these foods, these unhealthy foods, and they will not gain weight, but they're skinny, but they have fat in weird areas where you're like, they're under their arms, which is very common for people who store fat. They might have a little bit of a belly and have really, really skinny legs, right? I mean, I'm sure you've seen people like this, and they tell you like, oh, my body I can eat whatever I want. But typically in those people, they're undernourished. And it's because they've been under eating for a very, very long time. And this is the point I wanted to get into and get back to. What I mentioned about plateauing. So if you're taking what I'm saying, the calories in, calories out equation, you think you could do this for the rest of your life. Okay, well, I weigh 300 pounds. I dropped 50 pounds. My calorie intake was 3,000. I dropped it down to 2,500. I lost 50 pounds. I drop it down to 2,000. I lose another 50 pounds. Okay. What direction are you going? Are you going south? What's below zero? Nothing. Our bodies eventually get to a point where we have what's known as a survival mechanism, because of the fact that in prehistoric times, fat storage was actually deemed very valuable, because in times of famine, those would be the last people to die. Think about it. If the heavier you are, if you have 2 weeks without food, someone who's bigger is going to just last longer naturally because they have more fat storage to lean into.
That's what I say. I'm prepping for the end of the world.
Fair enough. Fair enough. But that's typically what happens, right? We have that storage for a reason. But if you keep being in a calorie deficit, and what happens, the biggest problem with yo-yo dieting is the fact that people will go up and then they'll lose weight. They'll go up and then they'll lose weight. And if you keep cutting down calories, you'll eventually going to get to that point where the mechanism just essentially shuts off. And no matter how many calories you burn on either side of the equation, if you exercise more and burn more calories and you eat less, you're still not going to lose weight. And oftentimes a good amount of clients that I've worked with will come in and they'll say, I lost, like you mentioned, I lost 60 pounds. And for the last 2 years, I've been dieting and I can't lose weight. I try carnivore, I try keto, I try fasting. I cannot lose weight. And that's because their body has turned into survival mode. And then they say, okay, well, what do I do? And the answer to that scares the heck out of everybody. You have to do the exact opposite. You have to increase your calories, because I look at their diets and they're only eating 1,600 calories because some nutrition guru or fitness coach gave them a diet plan that's only 1,400 calories that actually would have worked for them 2 years ago when they first lost the 60 pounds. But it's not working for them anymore. So what do I have to do with them? I have to reverse their diet. It's literally called reverse dieting. We increase, ideally you're doing this with training. We increase their calorie intake by like 200 to 300 calories per week while simultaneously exercising more. What that will do, and it'll scare them because they think they're going to gain weight, and sometimes they will, but typically the calories that are consumed, your body gets into a point of reactivity where it realizes, okay, I'm not in a famine anymore. Calories are coming in, I'm eating more than my body needs to maintain. So then what ends up happening is it starts bringing your metabolic rate closer to your baseline. So if your baseline is at maintenance 1,800 calories, but you've been eating 1,200 calories for a prolonged period of time, your baseline then becomes 1,200, which is why it's so difficult to lose weight. But if you start incorporating calories back up, then you start getting back up to that 1,600 slowly but surely. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you'll eat more calories up until you're getting up to 1,800, and you won't actually gain weight in those 600 calorie range because your body's just like, oh, okay, things are going good, and you start becoming more efficient with burning off calories, especially if you do this at the same time that you start muscle building and weight training, because then by increasing those calories, that increase in calories is going to build muscle. Now, if you use those calories that you're increasing by to then build more muscle tissue, muscle is way more metabolically active than fat. And what that means is, you hear people say all the time, this food increases your metabolism. It's not true. No food increases your metabolism. The only thing that can increase your metabolic rate is having more muscle. That's it. So the only way to do that is to build muscle. By building the muscle, then you get to a point where you're at roughly 1,800 calories. Then from there, I would say you go a little bit beyond that. You start building a little bit more muscle. Maybe you've gained a little bit of weight, but now you can actually start implementing a quote unquote diet or a calorie deficit where you drop down 200 calories and you're going back to your old metabolic rate slowly a little bit lower. Then what ends up happening is you start cutting off weight, but more importantly, you're cutting off body fat, which is truly what we're trying to lose when we lose weight. We are not trying to lose muscle. You shouldn't be trying to lose muscle because you want the preservation of muscle as much as you can. Naturally, when you try to lose weight, muscle will come off. But if you can double the ratio of fat to muscle loss, like 2 to 1, for every pound of muscle you lose 2 pounds of fat, golden. And that's where weight training is probably the most important element of any weight loss or weight gain, muscle gain diet, is the preservation of muscle. And you do that by weight training.
So 2 questions on that one. One is, typically, how long does it take? Say someone is plateaued, right? And they now have to regain that calorie back into that system. How long does it take for them to stay on that program? Or is this kind of like you're always constantly recalibrating, adjusting, until you've hopefully eventually get to stabilized status, and then you're just maintaining, right?
Yep.
And then second then is of the exercise that, one can be recommended to do to gain that muscle is weightlifting, like you were saying, the kind of the golden standard. What if I'm like, I just don't like to lift weights. I don't like to feel like I don't want to bulk up like, Arnold.
So let me address the last question, because oh my God, I've had this conversation with so many women, and I'm not picking on women here. I have been weight training for 14 years at this point. Okay. I have been trying my best to look like Arnold, and I've been lifting heavy weight. I've been eating a heck of a lot of calories. So when women come to me and tell me, I don't want to bulk up like Arnold, I'm like, if you bulk up like Arnold, tell me the secret. I will pay you to tell me how to train. It just doesn't happen. And the fear that you're saying, and that a lot of women do say when it comes to muscle building, it's not a wrong fear to have. I get it, but just think about what I said. Like there's men out there like myself who've been trying so hard to gain muscle, and it just doesn't happen. So the fact that you think you're going to have massive forearms, massive arms within a 6-week training program, it's just not going to happen. Like, it's genuinely not going to happen. And I don't know how else, and I've tried to communicate this with women before, I don't know how else to explain having muscle density and building muscle is going to actually help you achieve the figure you want. And typically the best way I do it is I show them women who have muscle that might not look like they have muscle, right? So I'll show them like a lot of gymnasts, a lot of track and field athletes, a lot of women who are aesthetically feminine. They have like feminine muscle, if you will, where it looks nice. Their arms look toned, their legs look toned without looking beefy, right? Typically when women have that fear, it's because they see women who are just jacked. Female.
We're thinking about the bodybuilding
Correct.
competition type.
Right. But most of those women are A, not natural, if they're excessively big, or B, they're at a point where they're so lean. And that was the point that I'm getting at. In order to have your muscles bulging to that level, you got to have a certain level of body fat. Like I think I've shown you pictures, and I've shown other people pictures of my wife when she competed, like just completely just built, right? You would think she's huge, but she's still petite. She might have weighed under 130, 120, 110 even, but her body fat was pushing under 12%, right? But that's what makes the muscles so defined, is the dryness and the depth of less body fat. So I like to show women those images of just naturally fit women. And I think we're also now in a culture where we wanted women to be skinny, right? Skinny was like what was attractive. Whereas now, thicker, muscular built women that have more of a frame and have more curves to them is what's genuinely more attractive, right? So I think we're naturally progressing in that way. So the answer to your question of like, well, what if I don't like weight training? Is that like the gold standard? And the answer is yes. And my answer to that is find either a training partner, a training coach, or a training program that you enjoy. There's multiple ways. People think, again, I have to go into the gym, I have to lift weights by myself, don't know what the hell I'm doing, and they get overwhelmed, rightfully so. But there's many group fitness classes you can go to. There's many personal trainers you can find. There's many gym partners you can go with. One of those 3 elements will make your weight training journey significantly more pleasurable.
Yeah.
No doubt about it. And I encourage people to try one of those 3. It's very tough. Don't go into the gym by yourself trying to identify, okay, how do I figure this out, or go online.
Sometimes I almost feel like weightlifting is like a solo sport. Maybe that's my misconception, right? Because that's what I see. Like, the image of a weightlifter is someone who puts the earbud in, and then they're pumping iron, and
it's true.
Don't talk to me.
Well, I mean, and that is gym culture. There is a gym culture, and once you get into it, it's funny. Once you get into it, you eventually turn into that person. Truly, like people start. This is how people start. Natural progression. They'll do a fitness class. That's where I would recommend people to start. Go to a gym that has fitness classes, your local gym, and go and do that. And you'll meet people that are very similar to you, that are on the same journey as you. You'll have a blend of like your fitness instructor, and you'll have like 2 or 3, just like any school. Right. You'll have 2 or 3 people who are like top of the class and doing very well, front row, wanting all the attention. And everyone else kind of just morphs in the back. But you'll start doing things, and you're struggling with these people, and you're kind of doing something together. And as you start seeing benefits, you start making friends. The friends will tell you, hey, you look like, your arms look great, or your legs look really good. You build a little friendship from that. Then you start morphing into like the middle of the pack, and you realize, I kind of want a little bit more. I want something that's a little bit more programmed to me. Like, hey, I've noticed, you'll notice things about your body. Like, hey, my legs have gotten really big, but my arms haven't. So like maybe I should try to do something on my own, like with a coach. Then they'll naturally progress to like group personal training, maybe 2 or 3 people, or maybe individually at that point. Then you start trying to build the physique you want. You're like, I like the women that have really nice leg muscles. I want to have leg muscles, or I want to have nice shoulders because they make me look slim in a dress. However you want to design it. Then they go to people that are personal trainers, they learn from the trainers, and then they meet other people who are like fitter than them or fit like them. Then they start wanting to train on their own because they start enjoying the process of getting sucked into just the rhythm of training, or like they have their headphones in and like you're in that zone. And I love that. I personally love that because there's something about like you embrace that. You embrace the suck is what they say. That's the natural progression for people. But and sometimes it's not. Sometimes like I've had friends and clients who will their whole life just go to group fitness classes. I think that's cool. Orange Theory, Pure Barre is very popular, Pilates. And again, you don't need to lift weights to build muscle. Pilates is one of the most effective things to do, and they don't use weights. I will always say resistance training is the best thing. Lifting weights is the gold standard. But if you need to ease into it, there are other fitness programs that you can try.
That's good to know.
For sure. Yeah.
Because I think what you imagine is not the reality out there,
For
right?
sure.
So for those of us who are like intimidated by this whole process,
Yeah.
you're like, I can get on a treadmill and walk. I can do the walk. I can do the basic stuff,
Right.
but anything beyond that, it
Intimidating.
just there's the fear of the unknown.
Yeah.
And that's purely, what it is.
Yeah.
Right. So
No,
I'm glad we're having this conversation.
No, I think just starting with I think just getting started is so important. And I just wanted to address your other question. How long to like kind of like reset to that baseline?
Yeah.
Right. If you're doing it, like if you're taking out training right now. So imagine you're not training and you're just eating 2,000 calories like you have been, but you change the quality of your carbohydrates or your proteins or your fat, where they're coming from. So, I mean, let's be realistic. Most people that are going on a diet or on a weight loss journey, eating 2,000 calories are not eating only nutritious foods, right? They're probably having some fast food. They're probably having some unhealthy processed foods throughout their day. If you eliminate those processed foods and replace them calorie for calorie on its own, that will help reset your metabolic rate a little bit better, because what's going to happen is more than likely you're going to be deficient in certain nutrients. By substituting out the unhealthy foods for more healthy, whole grain, whole plant-based foods, you're going to replenish some of those nutrients that were deficient. Those nutrients play a key role in your metabolism. So by replenishing those nutrients, if you were deficient especially, you're going to help reset that. So you'll notice a positive effect by just switching out the type of calories that you're eating. That will help you get back to your baseline earlier on. And eating more calories in general, I would say if you're trying to get back to that baseline, the first thing to start with is protein. Most people are deficient. So if you're eating a low caloric intake because you've plateaued, if you will, first and foremost, use like a MyFitnessPal app to check how much you've been eating. Let's say you find out I've only been eating 1,200 calories. The first time you increase your calories, only do it from protein. Because I promise you, if you're only eating 1,200 calories, you're not eating enough protein. 100%. Maybe you increase your protein by 40 grams, which is a lot of protein, but let's say you do 40 grams. That's the equivalent of 160 calories. And then maybe you add in some avocado, some fats. So you increase your total calories per week by 250. Per day by 250. Right? You've done it by 75% protein and 25% fat. Protein's not, at that point where you're so famished, protein is not going to be then stored as fat. Our bodies do not want to turn protein into fat. So do that protein and you'll eventually start working your way back up. Now, if you're doing both sides of the equation, right, you're doing the protein and you're doing the muscle building, weight training, that's the super component together. You start building muscle, you replenish your protein stores, your body's like, oh, we're getting out of this famine mode. We're healthy again. Like our body can start getting back to normal. You'll start seeing changes within 2 to 4 weeks. And then at that point, you don't necessarily want to cut calories yet. You want to focus on the muscle building aspect of it. See, when we diet and we tell people to weight train, the purpose of weight training at that point is to prevent any muscle loss. Because it's very, very difficult, unless you're on steroids, to be able to both gain muscle and lose fat at the same time. It's very challenging. So if you're at a point in your weight loss journey where you've never weight trained, and then you go on a diet trying to preserve muscle, you have nothing to preserve. You need to
Yeah.
build that. And in order to build that, as I just mentioned, you need to go in a little bit of a calorie surplus, healthy calorie surplus. Chances are, if you've plateaued, you've gotten below that, get into a calorie surplus with protein, couple that with your weight training, and pretty soon you're going to start building muscle. And as you build muscle, you'll be more effective and more efficient at burning fat. And yeah, you might not be losing weight. Your weight might stay the same for 8 weeks, but your body composition will drastically change as a result of that.
That's kind of cool.
It is.
Because I mean,
I
8 weeks is not even that long, right?
No.
To
No.
get
And
something
what's
going
crazy
there.
is if you haven't trained, like
Mhm.
weight trained, the first 8 weeks, oh my goodness, like you'll see the biggest gains, like
Mm.
muscle gains in the first 8 weeks as an
Right.
untrained person. And even if you have trained, but it's been a while since you've weight trained, getting back into it, there's this like muscle regeneration where we have this concept of muscle memory, where our muscles remember when our biceps or our shoulders were a certain size,
Mhm.
and we still have the cells in there. They're just dormant, right? So when we build muscle, it's like fat. When we build muscle, they grow big, but if we don't work out for 3 years, they shrink, but they don't go away. They just shrink to a very, very small size, but the muscle fibers are still there. So by pumping in, by muscle training, weight training them, you start building those fibers back up and they start growing back to where they were.
Mhm.
That's easier than having to go into the gym and have to start from scratch and build new muscle fibers from scratch.
Right.
So it's actually easier if you had done some form of weight training.
So that's why you were saying that, it's actually good to start lifting younger, actually,
Mm.
so that you're starting to build that muscle
Yep.
fibers, I guess,
Yep.
early, so that in case down the road, I don't know, things get busy and you stop, you still
Yep.
have that. That's actually good to know.
Well, have you noticed that a lot of college athletes, like you'll have people who are college athletes, see a lot of 40-year-old men, 50-year-old men who are like, back in my day, I used to be swole.
Yeah.
So I used to be, 6'2", 250. And they're like, what happened, man? But typically, if you put them on a training program,
Hmm.
their muscle reactivity is quick.
Yeah.
They'll gain muscle back because they've never really lost the cells, muscle fibers. They've just shrunk so much.
Well, that's actually very motivational for people.
Of course.
Because-
And most people have played as a child. Most people played, and of course, this is going to be dependent on sport, right? If you were a soccer player, as an example, like, yeah, you're going to have those muscle fibers in your legs, but upper body, if you never trained them, you're going to need to train them from scratch. But it is encouraging because most people have done some form of physical activity in the past. And typically, when you go back into it, that muscle building is going to be a little bit easier. It's just more a matter of finding the enjoyment in it.
Mhm. Well,
So-
that's cool. I mean, I'm like, yeah, this is like motivational now.
No, and I'm glad, and I know we've kind of gone a little bit longer today, but I'm glad because the questions that you have, and this is what we had talked about, our dynamic is nice because you can speak from an average normal person who's going through this on your own, right? This is your journey, this is your experience, and to be able to say like, hey, I don't know what's going on, and most questions that you'll have are questions that people have, and so talking about different diets and maybe debunking why the diet itself isn't the reason why you're losing weight, but just the general premise of calories in, calories out, and why that's the most important thing to look at, but not the only thing to look at when we're talking about whole foods, nutritious foods versus how you can lose weight, even just eating McDonald's, but why it's more beneficial to do it with nutritious foods. And we can have another topic on that. I know we didn't get to the expensive versus cheap debate in terms of whole foods and fast food, and why most people think it's actually cheaper to eat fast food than it is to eat whole foods, which I firmly disagree with. Show you my budget for our food and in terms of how we eat. So maybe we'll have another episode on that. But I hope that this helped kind of clarify some things. I hope, hey, you got some benefit from it. I hope listeners got some benefit from it. But do you have anything you want to finish up with? Any final thoughts, final questions?
No, I mean, this is a very like useful information, because we tend to focus on financial usually a lot, but even when I was listening to you, there's a lot of correlation between these two worlds, and and part of it is a lot of times it's like you don't even know what kind of questions to ask, right? There's just so many different things out there that pulls us, right? Like YouTube shows us one way, and then you're like, oh yeah, this must be the way. And you don't know what is the truth out there until you start looking, right? And uncovering things. So I certainly learned a lot today. So thank you, Nino,
Yeah,
for sharing your knowledge. And
yeah.
that's amazing that we are able to kind of combine our two worlds together like this.
Yeah. And
do this,
again,
so.
you know, hopefully making the lives of people better and giving some resources, giving some hope, giving
Yeah.
some just general.
We're gonna live till 121. You're never gonna stop listening, hearing from us.
Someone, that's funny. I always say that because people are like, well, what's your goal? And I always struggle with identifying my fitness goals because I've kind of, I've done the things I wanted to do, and I want to reach my genetic potential in terms of muscle building, but there's only so far I can go. But I want to live a long life. And I remember when Mike did my first policy, it's like 121, right? Is when you're going to live to. I'm like, I'm going to outlive that. I want to get a check for my death benefit at 121 and be like, made it, guys. Let's go. I mean, the centenarians are just, as we get older, generally, like the population is getting bigger of centenarians. I think it would be fabulous to live to 100.
Yeah, and healthy too.
Healthy 100, right? Not just yeah, exactly.
Right.
So, well, that's what we're on this journey. We're trying to find those solutions and have a good quality of life. So, hey, again, thank you for joining, and I'm glad. Thank you for letting me into your beautiful home with dibs on your money here, the dynamic income banking snowball system. So, it's been incredible. I love being here. Hopefully we can do some more in-person meetups.
Excellent. Thank you.
All right. Everybody take care. Stay tuned for the next episode of Finding Financial Fitness. Take care.